Hi, my name is Kathy Baker, and I am here with Erin Birch. We are the directors of Center Operations for Mile High Early Learning. We're very happy to have you join us today as we walk through some of the basics of licensing and health regulations. We know that this is not everyone's favorite topic. It's not ours either. However, everyone who works in a licensed center like ours, we really do need to know all of this information. So we will make this presentation as interesting and as applicable as we can. So in this session, we are going to share with you several of the specific licensing and health regs that will affect the procedures that you need to follow in the classroom. At the end, we'll give you a chance to apply this information to what you do each day by having you consider some challenging scenarios through a licensing lens. Some of this material is very detailed, and if you are new to early childhood, it can be hard to absorb all at once. So please feel free to pause the video anytime, take breaks as you need them, and then come back ready to continue. So let's start with the very basics. The first thing we need to do is make sure that each classroom is covered with the appropriate people. So licensing requires that classrooms with children ages 3 to 5 operate at a ratio of 1 teacher to a maximum of 10 students. That's the preschool ratio, 1 to 10. That means that a second teacher must be present when you have over 10. So if an 11th child arrives in a preschool classroom in the morning and the teacher's still alone, that teacher would need to call the office and ask for support before the parent could leave that child. We absolutely have to stay in ratio all the time. At Mile High, we cap the total number of students enrolled at 17, where we could go as high as 20, but we keep it at 17 during the day. Every once in a while, when the pandemic is gone and we might combine classes, we could go up to 20, particularly when outside, but that would be the very maximum, even outside in a great big space. Now shifting to the infant and toddler classrooms, the maximum ratio there is 1 to 5. So 1 teacher to 5 children or 2 teachers to 10 children in a classroom. Early Start would prefer that we maintain a 1 to 4 ratio as much as possible. So we do staff our rooms with 2 teachers and 8 children, but the maximum group size of combining classes outside or wherever is still 10. So in addition to ratios, we must always pay attention to having a group leader in the classroom. So there are several ways to become group leader. It's called the early childhood teacher in licensing, or an ECT, you might hear that phrase. That means that we have to have one in the classroom and or that person could be alone with children. Another licensing designation is an ECT TA or teacher assistant. That person could also be alone in a classroom or lead a classroom for short periods of the day. That's complicated. We'll let you know when you get there. But you need to know what you are. So if you are not an ECT or an ECT TA, that means you are a staff aide, and you may always support and count in ratio, but never by yourself. And you always have to be with an early childhood person. We have 2 methods of documenting which children are present, and this monitoring is the last really important thing that we have to be in compliance in all the time. You have got to know how many children are in your classroom. Licensing reps, when they walk in to monitor, they will almost always ask you this first thing when they walk in the room: how many do you have? You have our attendance form, which requires parent signatures both in and out each day, and which also record the meals served, the breakfast, lunch, and snack. That form, the BLS, is in there. In times of pandemic, it's kept outside the classroom. So the other form that we have in the classroom that we use, we call the Child Supervision Roster, and that one, or the CSR, is just a name-to-face monitoring. That form should be used to record as soon as that child walks in the day, their name gets written on there, and then every half hour or so, the teacher does a check and confirms that all of those children that are listed on there are still in the room and that those numbers match. So that's a mouthful, but it'll make sense when you get in there. We just wanted you to have a peek at what those forms look like and make sure that you're always on top of, is this a correct ratio in the classroom? Is there an ECT here? And are we monitoring how many children we have? So let's move on to allergies and medications. This is another really basic thing you have to know. Our way of keeping track of this is we have red emergency backpacks. So they're literally backpacks. They are kept in a high hook in the classroom, which keeps it, quote, out of reach of children. But it needs to always be accessible to teachers. If the classroom goes outside, it needs to go outside with you, and it should be worn by a teacher. Inside this backpack are medical supplies, so Band-Aids, some things that you might need if you are outside and need a little bit of medical attention. Medications are listed in there, are kept in there, like an EpiPen, like you see in the picture. Anything that's an emergency med should be in that backpack. And then there's a thin red binder that has emergency information with the paperwork and the permissions to use those. The binder inside has tabs for each child who has an allergy or any kind of medical condition. A licensing rep also may ask you if they walk into a classroom or your group outside and say, do you have any children with medications? You have to know the answer. And that's because you need to be able to monitor that child appropriately and take good care of that child. The backpack itself and the binder itself are monitored by the nurses on a regular basis. So you just need to know that it's there. So the next thing we'll talk about is sunscreen. This is pretty simple and straightforward. Sunscreen should be used per the instructions on the bottle, but it will likely say that it needs to be applied 20 to 30 minutes in advance to any part of the body that is exposed to every child older than 12 months old, so we don't do under a year, but all year long. Especially in Denver, we know how bright the sun is, and it's really important that any piece of part of the skin that's exposed needs to have sunscreen on there. Mile High provides sunscreen for children, and parents sign a permission form at enrollment for that. If they don't want to use ours, they can bring their own in, and you should know which child has that, but most of them will use the brands that we bring in. Children who are between the ages of 1 and 4 per licensing need assistance to put on. So teachers put on gloves and help put them on. It's kind of a nice one-on-one time that you can have with children as you do that. Children who have turned 4 and who want to, they're allowed to apply it themselves. You just have to monitor and make sure they don't miss any big spots. Sunscreen bottles, by the way, are always labeled keep out of reach of children. There's just no such thing as one that is not. So as such, it needs to be either in the hands of a teacher, you need to hold on to it, or it needs to be stored in a locked cabinet when not in use. And your program director can order more whenever you need that. Just give them a heads up. Napping, everybody's favorite part of the day, right? Once they're sleeping. Children who are in our care for more than 5 hours must be offered a rest period on an appropriate surface. So Mile High uses 2-inch foam mats, which must be stored when they're being used by the children at least 2 feet apart. During COVID pandemic, it's recommended to spread them to 6 feet apart if possible. So really as far apart as you can, minimum 2 feet, but really right now we're having them 4 or 5 feet apart, which is much, much better for their health. Each child is assigned a sheet and a blanket from the center, and we launder that at least once a week. Each day when the child is done with their sheet or their blanket, they return it to their cubby, or they have boxes nearby their cubbies. And then the teachers need to sanitize the mats before storing them for the next day. So they can be stored on top of each other, but they have to be sanitized first. And then this is the actual licensing reg I'd like to read to you because this is important. Licensing requires our centers to provide a rest period with equipment for at least 30 minutes each day. That's how long they need to rest minimum. For children who have been in the center longer than 5 hours. Quiet activities are permissible during that 30-minute period. Children must not be forced to sleep. So we encourage sleep, but we do not force them. Children who do not sleep after 30 minutes must be allowed to move to another area and be provided with quiet toys and equipment to play with, such as puzzles or books. Children must be allowed to leave their napping area within 10 minutes of waking. So just because nap time on the schedule is 1 to 3 does not mean children need to stay on their nap mats the entire time. And work with your co-teachers and your director if you have any questions about how to make that happen. The next section is about food. Food is a very important part of our program. Head Start encourages us to feed the children 3 times per day if they're there all day long in the extended day or even in the full day 7-hour classes. And we feed 2 times a day for the part day classes. So it's just a really key component of Head Start. Serving meals family style, which allows children to serve themselves from larger serving bowls, is an important part of our curriculum. It encourages independence, gives children the choice of how much of each item to serve themselves, gives teachers time to sit with the children and lead conversation. Right now, however, due to health restrictions, we have suspended family style meals and we're currently serving children plated meals. We will go back to the other when we can, but for now, we still want to try to accomplish as much of the other as we can, meaning that we want at least one teacher sitting at the table with the children and having conversation and still including and encouraging independence as much as we can. And by the way, it's very important that food never be used as a reward. It can't be used as a punishment for negative behavior. You don't want to withhold it. You know, it's one thing to say, okay, everybody fix their mats and then you can come eat. But if they really don't do it, you really cannot withhold food for a child. So you need to be very, very careful with that. We want to encourage healthy attitudes toward food, and we want children to feel secure about having their needs met at school. So in the morning, a child who arrives late and who's hungry and they've missed breakfast, they can be offered a snack. Call for help from the director if you would like, or if you need it. We don't allow children to bring food of any kind into the classroom, and we normally don't allow children to take home food as well. Right now we have a waiver for that with COVID and we can send packaged food home, but usually we just serve it in the classroom and it's consumed there. And then we'll just adapt as the pandemic goes away and we get back to normal. Moving on to active supervision. We've already talked about this briefly because you'll see on the screen we're talking about the BLS, that attendance form where children have to be signed in and out. The CSR is that checkoff sheet where you're checking every 30 minutes or so that all of the names of the children who are supposed to be here match the names of the children I see in the classroom, and those numbers are good. Wanted to bring it up again because it's such a key component of keeping children safe during the day. This is tough during 2 times a day. One, transition. So if you are going from, say, inside a classroom to outside, it is really tough to pay attention and keep track during that time. You really have to count and name to face, you know, right away at the beginning. And then in the middle of the transition, you're counting and name to face again when you get outside. And you want to make sure that you have the same amount of children. Every once in a while, there are therapists who come, a parent comes to pick up while you're transitioning. Things like that can cause your count to get off. So it's really important that you know who you have before, during, and after a transition, whether you're going outside and then do the reverse when you come back inside as well. We have to know who we have all the time. Moving on to technology, Mile High really does not have a high use of technology in our program. This is a new policy, and we haven't really completely rolled this out yet, but we did finally sit down and try to put some numbers to it, and you can see that we only approve a very limited use of technology with the children. So number one, for preschool and toddlers, it's 25 to 30 minutes, and that's a week. That's not a typo. It's not per day. It's a week. So it's really 5 minutes a day that you can pull out an educational supporting video or pictures or something like that for the classroom, but it needs to be in your lesson plan. For infants, there's still nothing approved. It's just not recommended per licensing. We do not allow it to be used how you see in the picture where there's a toddler just holding it by themselves. We do not want one-on-one use of technology. It really should be whole child. The exception to that would be if a child has a diagnosed special need, an IEP or an IFSP or some type of behavioral support plan. If they have one of those, then that would be an exception. But as a rule, it's really just limited use in the groups. We don't use TVs and movies. We don't want teachers using their personal devices. It should be the actual classroom assigned technology, either a laptop or an iPad that we use. And then these educational videos, like I said, they need to be on your current lesson plan, which will then have been pre-approved by the program director. They know how you're using it. We're just being very, very slow to get on the the train of using technology in the classroom, and instead we're focusing that most of our learning is done with the materials that are hands-on materials and not the screen time. Music is related to technology. Make sure that it is age appropriate. Whatever you do play for children, make sure the volume is appropriate. It's not really a dance time at school, at least not all the time. It can be loud when you're outside, but make sure it's appropriate. And if they are music videos, even those need to be pre-approved on your lesson plan. So that was a lot of information really fast. I wanted to take a quick pause before we move on. Technology for teachers brings with it cords of all kinds, and it become a safety issue. Toddlers are apt to, if you've got a cord plugged in where they can reach it, you know, most likely they are going to at some point reach for it, so that you really have to be careful where you do plug in cords so that you can charge up your devices. Also, even preschoolers can get into trouble with it. As a side note, licensing regs in general are often in place because somebody got injured, and that has happened also with charging cords. Let's go ahead and move forward, and I've got some pictures for you. So here's a toddler chewing on a cord. Really could happen. Here, the top right and the bottom left things, those are accidents that happened when a charger is plugged into the wall and it has access to the electricity, and the other side is not plugged into a device. That becomes something that can cause a problem. So a child putting it in their mouth can get injured. You can see in that sad picture, and then you can see even it can burn objects. And then in the lower right hand corner, you just, as a reminder, all of those need to be plugged in, all covered all the time. Some of our we're moving toward plate covers, but still those can stick. You have to make sure that all of those outlets that are exposed don't stay that way, and you need to make sure they're covered all of the time. So again, with injuries, minor injuries are common with young children, no matter how hard we work to avoid them. So what do we do? First of all, when a child comes to the classroom each morning, the teacher should do a brief safety check on the child. So you look for any obvious signs of illness or injury. If a child arrives with a mark of some sort on them, please ask the child who brought them fill out a home accident report to document the injury. These are white. They are in English and Spanish if needed. If the mark is not noticed until later in the day, but it happened at home, you know, so you go to help a child later, they say, oh, my owie's hurting, and they pull up their shirt and you find something new. You know, there's a home accident report that you can fill out that is yellow, and then report that to your director. Ask them to call the parent and to let them know that the form will be ready for them to finish filling out at pickup, and maybe to get the story on how the injury happened, so we have some information to put on there. If during the day an accident or injury occurs and at our school premises, then the teachers who are present during that injury need to fill out the white accident form, and that using the matter-of-fact language to describe the injury. So there is a half-inch cut on the left knee. It occurred when a child fell down while running on the sidewalk on the playground. It was cleaned with soap and water, and a bandage was applied. Those are matter-of-fact phrases. You don't want to put, there's a huge cut on the knee that bled everywhere. It happened because they wouldn't stop running even though I asked them to. Okay, that sounds ridiculous, but I have seen it. I'm not kidding you, that type of phrase written on there. So you might just be upset because there was blood and you're a little escalated yourself. Make sure you take some breaths and really read it, write it carefully, I guess, and then proofread it yourself to make sure that you are writing them appropriately. In addition, as teachers, you need to maintain confidentiality of other children on these forms, and don't record the names of the other children on a report. So even if the child, for example, is old enough to tell their parent, so-and-so hit me, you don't put that so-and-so's name. You just say another child. You know, this child got hit by another child. You don't say got hit by Joe. Please ask whoever picks up the child to sign the form, letting them know that you are informing them of the injury. Doesn't mean they're saying it's okay. They're just acknowledging that they got the information, and then a parent can request a copy of the report if they would like one. So there's a really important thing to remember here. If a child is injured on their head or their face at school or any serious injury elsewhere, parents should be notified right away. We don't just wait till the end of the day on the more serious injuries. So your director can make this call or can send an email for you, whatever the parent prefers. But we don't want parents to be surprised by a significant injury at the end of the day. And we certainly want to make sure that they have the information if they fell and hurt their head, but maybe they were picked up by someone else. We need to make sure that the parent got that information for the evening. So any incidents of head or other serious injury should be reported to your director right away. They will contact also the nurses for guidance, and we'll make sure that we've taken proper care of the child from head to toe. And just another note, if a child is injured at school and then needs to be seen by a doctor, and sometimes that serious of injury can happen, we're also required to report that to licensing within 24 hours. So it's really important that the director has a heads up right away on that because the clock is ticking. So one more just reminder on general compliance. Licensing requires our centers to do regular safety drills, including fire drills, tornado drills, shelter-in-place drills. Your program director should have given you specific guidance as to what to do in each of these drills. They keep a log of each of these with the dates and the number of children, etc. And you should know where to go in case of emergency, and you should be doing this, and this will happen. If you've been working for a month, you should have at least had a fire drill, if not some of these others. Also, as child care workers, you are child abuse mandatory reporters. And as hard as that is something serious, and we do keep logs of that as well. We will support anyone who feels the need to make a report based on the guidance of your mandatory reporter training. So that was a lot of info, and so I would encourage you to take a quick break. We're going to pause right here, and I would ask that you find that folder that you were given during this week of training and pull out the licensing sign-off sheet in your packet. It looks a little bit, if you back up one, Erin, I think there's a picture of, oh, we're missing the form. There is a licensing sign-off sheet, just an 8.5 by 11 sheet, and it has places for you to initial in 2 different columns. So if you could please look at each item. These are actual items that have been written up by licensing. So they may seem silly, they may not, but please read through them, see if you understand what the reason is why it was cited, and then initial in each one. If you don't understand what the error is, just circle it, and then run that by your director, your sister director, as you turn this in. When everything is complete, then you can sign and date the bottom of the form. This is going to be part of your homework. Now, Erin is going to go ahead and talk with you about specific health and safety regulations.
Thank you, Kathy. Hopefully you had a nice break and were able to look through the licensing check-off sheet and see some of the items that have occurred recently within our centers. It's a really great lead into our next section, which is health and safety basics. Our centers are regulated by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Safety. So why does that matter, and how might it impact you in your classroom? The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment governs the minimum health and sanitation requirements for the operation and the maintenance of our centers. The rules and regulations are in place to really ensure that we're protecting the health of children and staff that are in our facilities. So let's take a look at how the rules and regulations apply to your role in your center and in your classroom. The school grounds. So each day when you arrive on site, you should take a moment to check the grounds. Do a walkthrough of your playground to check the fences, make sure that the fences are okay, there are no tears or sharp points, that the resilient surfaces, which could be ground cover, mulch, are looking okay, and that they have enough fluff to them and are level with the sidewalks that may be running throughout your playground. And also looking for trash or any foreign objects that might have maybe flown in with the wind overnight, such as a plastic bag or a balloon, or may have been left there by somebody within your community, such as a soda can. If you find something that isn't part of your playground material or that you think should not be there, please go ahead and remove the item safely and let your program director or assistant director know that you found it on the playground and removed it. In addition to the playgrounds and the outside of the building, the interior of your school building should be clean and sanitary. It should also be free of insects and rodents and not pose a health hazard to children. If you see something such as ants or maybe even a light bulb that is out and not working, please notify your assistant director or program director immediately of the concern so that they may submit a maintenance request. Once that maintenance request is submitted, our custodial crew within Mile High will come to the center, assess the situation, and make sure that it's fixed within an appropriate amount of time. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment also governs that our water supply must be readily accessible to children when the facility is open and operational. So water bottles should also be available and accessible to children throughout the day. Water bottles currently are provided by Mile High, so each student in attendance will receive a water bottle that they may use while they're at school. It's important to note that if the hot water in your classroom is not working, please immediately notify your program director or assistant director because hot water is required at all times for center operations. Within your classroom, toileting facilities should be available and accessible for children to use, and depending on what age group you're working with, to use with teacher support. A minimum of one lavatory, which is a room with a sink, and one flush toilet must be provided for each 15 or fewer children, which is why we often have 2 bathrooms in many of our preschool classrooms. The toilet facilities must be provided for children that are 2 years of age or older, which is why you'll also see that our toddler classrooms have bathrooms as well. In addition to our toileting facilities, a hand washing sink must be available to children within the classroom. A labeled soap dispenser and single serve towel should also be supplied so children have access. So you can see in this picture that there is a soap bottle and a towel dispenser so that children have the ability to go to the sink to wash their hands, and they have access to the materials that they need to be able to do it successfully. It's also important to note that depending on the age group, a teacher might need to be available to support hand washing. With many extended day programs throughout Mile High Early Learning, our centers have laundry facilities available. These areas should be inaccessible to children with the door closed and a lock at a higher point on the door that is not within reach for children. A custodial area is often in the same place as your laundry facility and should include a sink and a mop, and yet again be inaccessible to children. So that is very important to note that if you are doing laundry or gathering something from the laundry or custodial area, that when you leave that space that you close the door and lock the door if the center in which you are working does have a lock. Let's move a little bit into our classrooms. Within each of our classrooms, each child should have an individual cubby with a coat hook to store their personal items. It's important that personal items do not touch one another's, and why the cubbies provided are for single use. As a staff member, your personal items should also be stored separately in your provided locker within your center and or a locked closet, and should be inaccessible to children. Within each of our classrooms, we have many different materials, toys, furnishings, and equipment to enhance children's educational experiences. All items in your classroom should be clean and in good repair and checked daily to ensure that they are not broken and or hazardous to children. Equipment and toys specifically for infants and toddlers should have a smooth surface so that they can be easily cleaned and washed. And right now, sensory tables typically, when filled with water, should be emptied after each use by a group of children and at least daily. But currently, due to COVID restrictions, we are not allowed to do group usage of sensory tables, but are allowed to do individual sensory boxes for children, which should also be changed and emptied daily. Let's look a little bit into our own personal health. Upon employment, you will be health screened to ensure that you are in good health and free of any communicable diseases while caring for children. Each center has thermometers available for the chance that a staff or a child becomes ill. When a child becomes ill, we want to make sure that we're separating them from the larger group in the classroom, but also making sure that they're comfortable. So removing them to a space in the classroom where the child can rest while waiting for their parent to come and pick up. We do keep a log in the classroom to record children's symptoms of illness and making sure that we're tracking if there are any reoccurring symptoms throughout multiple children within the classroom and the center. As part of our health practices, staff members and children toddler age or older must wash their hands. They must wash their hands upon arrival for the day and after breaks. When caregivers move from caring for one group or classroom of children to another. So right now, during COVID restrictions, teachers are not moving from different groups or different classrooms, but at some point, if we're able to go back to our typical operations, will be important for teachers to remember that they must wash their hands when moving from one group to another. Teachers must also wash their hands before and after preparing food or beverages, eating, handling food, or feeding a child. Must wash your hands before giving medication, applying a medical ointment or cream, and or administering first aid. And also during the setup or use of a sensory table. Staff members must wash their hands after using the toilet or assisting a child with toileting, diapering each child and or handling body fluids, or handling animals or cleaning up animal waste. Must also wash your hands when coming in from outdoors, or cleaning or handling any garbage, or at any other time that your hands may become soiled throughout the day. As you can tell, this is a very long and extensive list of when staff members must wash their hands. So please feel free to pause the video and go back and make sure that you have a clear understanding of when, not only yourself, but when children must wash their hands throughout the day as well. It's also important to note that the use of hand sanitizers or wipes in lieu of hand washing is not approved for use within the facility. So right now during COVID restrictions, we do have quite a bit of hand sanitizer available to staff and or to parents or adults outside of the building. It should not be used in the place of hand washing, but in addition to hand washing. Here in infant classrooms, teachers and staff are required to wear a smock over their clothing while working in the space. And that is really to make sure that we're protecting not only ourselves, but the children enrolled from anything that might be on your clothing when you come into the building. We'll also want to make sure that when providing formula or breast milk, that warm water is an approved way to thaw or warm the milk within a bottle. Also, as a reminder, please remember and think back on the required trainings that you took prior to stepping into the classroom. Safe sleep and shaken baby, also known as sudden infant death syndrome. I want you to remember these trainings as you enter into the classroom when working with infants and toddlers. At Mile High Early Learning, we accept children of different age groups with individualized developmental needs. Diapering can occur for a child in any age group. Diapers should be checked for wetness and or feces at least every 2 hours, or whenever the child indicates discomfort or exhibits behavior that suggests that they have a soiled or wet diaper. The child then needs to be changed when they are found to be wet or soiled. A diaper changing station or changing area should be provided and located separate from any food preparation or food storage or food serving area. And lastly, soiled diapers, wipes, and gloves should be disposed of in a washable, covered container lined with a plastic bag and located adjacent to the changing table or changing area, and also be inaccessible to children. So in many of our infant and or toddler classrooms, we have trash cans that may have a lock on them so that children cannot gain access to the trash within the trash can. You might be wondering if we are allowed to have class pets. Class pets and or animals are allowed within our centers as long as we are adhering to the following guidelines. There are some animals that are prohibited within child care facilities: ferrets, primates, poisonous animals, including spiders or venomous insects, reptiles, including snakes and venomous amphibians, and or stray or wild animals or aggressive animals are not allowed within child care facilities. In addition, live poultry, including adult birds, chicks, ducklings, reptiles, and amphibians are prohibited from being in or on the premises of facilities caring only for children under the age of 5. And this is because infections from these animals can spread via fecal or oral transmission. And what we often know is that in groups or classrooms with children under the age of 5, that children often engage in frequent hand-to-mouth behaviors, which helps to spread the transmission. So many different animals that are not allowed. If you're interested in getting a class pet, please speak with your program director about what animal would be appropriate. Within our centers, you'll find materials that are potentially poisonous or toxic. We have the materials to be able to support our general maintenance of the building, the grounds, and our equipment. A good example of this is bleach. These items should be labeled and kept out of reach from children. A locked cabinet, a locked closet, or a tall shelf above children's height are an acceptable place to keep a mixed bleach solution that you will be using within your classroom to sanitize and disinfect. As an educational early childhood facility, we encourage the use of art and science materials and are required to use non-toxic and water-based materials when possible. So it's very important for you as a staff member to ensure that if you are bringing in outside materials, let's say to do a fun art or science activity within your classroom, that you make sure that the material does state that it is non-toxic. If you are unsure or unclear, please make sure that you speak with your program director and or assistant director, and they can support you with making sure that the materials are safe for classroom use. So here is the page that Kathy was mentioning earlier. If you have not already paused the video, please go ahead and do so and read through the licensing sign-off sheet to make sure that you understand the most recent violations and potentially why they occurred. So what does implementation of the licensing and health regulations look like in your classroom? We're going to take a few minutes to walk through the daily schedule and see how both licensing and health regulations potentially can play out during your day.
So starting at the very beginning of the day, if you are the one who opens a classroom before the children arrive, the first thing that you would do would be to walk around the classroom and do a safety check, make sure that nothing has happened overnight. I walked in once and there were tiles falling from the ceiling because it had been raining the night before. So you just never know, or ants or etc. So do a safety check, make sure everything looks fine. Take chairs down off the tables. Normally we put chairs up so that the tables can be mopped overnight, but children are not allowed to be in the room with chairs up. So even though an early child might like taking them down and helping you, we really are not allowed to do that per licensing. So after you've done a sweep of the classroom, take those chairs down, make the bleach bottles for the day, the sanitizer and the disinfectant, or check them however your system is at your center, and then go ahead and sanitize the surfaces. So all surfaces that will be children will have be touching and be eating from, which is our main tables, that needs to have a sanitizing solution. The disinfectant solution is used for the toileting areas or the bodily fluids areas, but just sanitize the surfaces so that they're ready to go. Make sure the bathroom looks ready to go. Put out any appropriate materials you want to start to the day, and make sure that everything is in good condition.
Next, we're going to just take a quick look at child drop-off time. So this is a time where when parents were coming into the building that teachers would support with ensuring that the child is signed in by the parent on the BLS. We also have a new guidance in place from state licensing that mentions if the parent does not sign in for the day, they're too busy, they are distracted talking with the teacher, and or the child is having a hard time getting dropped off for the day and the parent does not sign the child in, that the teacher may write down the time and sign the parent's name, write the parent's name, as long as the parent initials the signature and the time when they return to pick up the child at the end of the day. So really just supporting parents and understanding why it's important to make sure that their child is signed in. We also then want to note on the child supervision record that the child has come into the classroom and we are accounting for them in the space. Additionally, making sure that we're doing a name to face as new children come into the classroom and having an understanding of how many children we have in the classroom at all times, which can be often challenging when you have children being dropped off, potentially 2 or 3 at the same time.
So moving on to many classrooms kind of do a large group time or circle time early on in the morning. This is when active supervision is very important. Typically, one teacher will be leading the activity and the other one then is the support person. That support person would make sure to assist any children who need redirection to help them focus on what the learning target is. Having them socially distant as much as possible around the group area, making sure that they just have safe space between them and that everyone is acting appropriately. Sometimes if the children are all engaged, this might be a good time for the second person to prepare for the next activity, whether it's sanitizing a table, getting out new materials, but always that second person should be keeping an eye on what is going on in the classroom and making sure that since that one teacher is focusing on leading the activity, somebody else is paying attention to the group as a whole.
Great. Let's move to the next portion throughout your day, which is work time. And this can often be a large portion of your day. Again, like Kathy mentioned, we want to make sure that active supervision is happening. You might have one teacher that's working down on the floor with a small group of children and one teacher who is moving throughout the classroom to ensure that other children working in other center areas are safe and are supported. During this time, we want to make sure that we're pulling any toys that may have been put into a child's mouth out of the materials that are in the rotation for the day and putting that aside, knowing that you'll need to sanitize and disinfect that toy at a later point when you have a little bit more time. Also, this is a time that you want to ensure that you're monitoring toileting and hand washing and being available for children when necessary.
So at some point during the morning, typically every classroom, if the weather is all right, we'll take a time outside, which is wonderful. Remember to take that red emergency backpack with you, as we talked about earlier. Take the attendance list with you also. You need to have that with you in case anything were to happen as an emergency and you didn't have a chance to go back. So you always have that with the children. Make sure that that name to face count is checked before, during, and after the transition from outside, from inside to outside, and also from outside back in. During the outdoor time, provide active supervision for coverage of the entire playground. So monitor high danger areas. If you have swings, one teacher should be by the swings. If you have a high slide, you'll know in your playground where the high traffic or potential danger areas are. Make sure one teacher is positioned there. Make sure that as staff, you are not positioning yourselves together, but that at opposite ends of the playground. That allows you to monitor conversations children are having, just general safety, just general supervision, and also just to interact with the children and to just extend their play.
All All right, let's move on to lunch. And this could also apply to breakfast and or snack in the afternoon. So really want to make sure that one of the teachers is accounting for the food prep and sanitizing of the eating areas, um, while the other teacher in the classroom is continuing to monitor as children are potentially being released to go to their tables, wash their hands on their way, and gather any items or materials that they might need to do so. So active supervision comes into play here because you may have a teacher who is more focused on preparing food and plating meals, as well as sanitizing the table, and the other teacher would need to be focused on the children in the classroom and making sure that they are safely being released to go to their tables for lunch or breakfast or snack. We also want to make sure that we're sitting with children while we're eating for safety. So really monitoring when children are eating any food within the classroom to ensure that they are able to chew and swallow the food without any hazardous situations occurring. We're going to monitor the food intake and really make sure that children are not sometimes quickly shoving it into their mouth and or too much. And you being there and available at the table will help support you to do so. Also, we want to make sure that not touching each other's food is happening. And while you're sitting at the table with children, that's something that you can support with and in their learning during that time. And really talking about why it's important to keep our hands on our own food and not touching each other's. Also, teachers should be aware of any food allergies that children within your classroom might have, and making sure that you are paying attention to any food and or beverage that's coming into the classroom and being served to the children within your classroom. If you have a child that has a dairy intolerance or maybe a strawberry or a fruit allergy, then doing a double and triple check of the milk that's coming into the room for that child and or their specific plate that will have a different food substitute outside of the food allergy.
So after the children are done eating, as they finish, they will typically wash their hands, use the bathroom, or have a diaper changed, and then get to their mats. So the nap mats will have been set up likely by this time, and they can be assisted in falling asleep, and a lot of them really count on that to help them fall asleep. The classroom changes, the lights usually dim, things start to get quiet. You can play soft music to kind of be that cue. But as much as we want to encourage children to go ahead and have a rest period and to fall asleep if they can, if some children have not fallen asleep by 30 minutes after having laid down and tried, then they really do need to be provided quiet work material and allowed to get off their mat to use that. So if they do fall asleep and it really is calm, this is a lovely part of the time of day for teachers to either do some prep work on their future lesson plans or assessments. If you are an aide and not doing that, this is a great time for you to pick one section of the classroom to clean. If you're cleaning one set of shelves each nap time, then by the end of the week, everything on a rotating basis is staying really nice, clean and organized. This is a good time to declutter. And then by the time more children are awake than not, you can't do the cleaning anymore, but at least you are there and you can have one-on-one or small group conversations with children, which is just really a nice way to have them wake up. Once it is getting close to snack time and more of the children are awake and you flip on the lights and if things are getting put away, just remember to sanitize those mats and individually and wipe them off before you stack them and put them away for the next day.
As we look toward the end of the day for pickup time, this again is another time where active supervision is very important. So it's important to know the number of children that you have currently in your classroom, which sometimes can be challenging when you have children who are leaving, and you may have multiple children leaving at the same time. Marking your CSR, or the child supervision roster, is very important throughout the day, but at the end of the day as well, because it will allow you to see who has left and how many total children you still have left in your room. This would be a great time for teachers within the room to do name to face checks. So looking at who you have on your child supervision roster and making sure that you see that little beautiful child within the classroom. You can see their face and you can verify on the CSR that they are still within the classroom. This is also a time where one teacher might be more responsible for marking the CSR and ensuring that the count is correct, while the other teacher is still actively engaged in supporting children who are still in the room and still using materials or working in centers. During pickup time, when we have parents coming into the building, checking a photo ID for anyone who is picking up who is unknown to you is very important. You need to pull out the emergency contact binder that is within your red backpack in your classroom and flip to that child's emergency contact sheet, and then scroll to the bottom of the page where additional pickups for the child would be listed. You would check the person's photo ID against the emergency contact form and make sure that the name matches the person who is picking up. If the name is not on the emergency contact form, then you cannot release that child to that adult. This is a time when you would need to contact your program director, assistant director, and or one of the family and community advocates working in your center to come and support you during this process.
So once all of the children are gone, just to close the classroom, you will be putting the chairs back up onto the tables. That should have already been sanitized. Look around and disinfect all of the toys and surfaces. This is pretty easily done with the disinfectant bottle, and you can just spray that all over and let it dry overnight. If the children are not there, then it's fine to use the disinfectant. I would double check the BLS, which is that sign-in sheet, and the CSR, this child supervision roster, make sure that it was completed through the very last child. All of those signatures are there, all the checkoffs are there. And then I would pull up the new one for the next day on the CSR and have it ready to go. Please double check the bathrooms while you're doing that, just so we don't leave anyone behind mistakenly. And also to make sure that there isn't a big mess there. Flush the toilet if it's not flushed. From the bathroom floor to any classroom floor, sweep or pick up major spills. The janitor's job is not to do every little bit, but it is, they will do a last minute sweep and then they will mop for us. And lastly, I would gather the trash and put that aside. This might vary a little bit per center, but it's really nice to close that all up and make sure that we don't invite critters to come in overnight.
Hopefully you've had a little bit of an opportunity to think and reflect upon the licensing regulations and the health and safety regulations that you've heard today in this presentation. Think about how that might impact you in your role and what questions you might have of those specific items. So we're going to give you just a little bit of homework. Kathy referred to the folder earlier, but you should have this homework page within the professional development folder that you received during this week of training. And we're going to ask you to pull it out and read through the following scenarios. And from a licensing and health perspective, how would you respond to each of these scenarios? So please take the time to go through each one and really think about everything that you've learned within your experience in the classroom and today's training. And write down on your homework sheet your responses for each scenario.
And lastly, if you have any other questions, either from this particular training or from your experience in the classroom, please write them down also on your homework sheet. And then when you turn that in to one of the directors on site, then they can make sure that we get those answers for you. Thank you so much for your patience today, listening to all of these fun regulations, but we really hope that you will be able to use this information to have a smooth running classroom, a successful classroom without any incidences, and that you will really feel like you know what your role is and what you're doing. So we look forward to getting to know you as we see you in the classrooms, both Erin and me. So we hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you and bye-bye.